We're going to move on and just do a little bit of review of what we've been saying. And we began by saying this, that all of life's experiences are driving me to Christ. And that this world is the womb in which the child of God is birthed. And so we can look at it as a wide path that leads to death, and there's a narrow path that leads to life, and that life is Christ Himself. And we believe that there isn't anything that His nearness won't fix in our lives. You remember the story about the British pilot, and he was testing the airplane in World War I? And while he was testing the airplane, the stick began to shake. And he looked in the back of the plane, and the control rope that runs from the sticks to the wings had a rat on it nervously eating away at the rope. And the man thought, what am I going to do? Because if I let the rat go on, he'll eat through the rope and I'll lose control. If I let go of the stick and go grab the rat, I'm going to lose control. Either way, I'm going to lose control and die. And then finally the plan came to him. What I'll do is I'll pull back on the stick and gain altitude until it gets so cold I'll freeze the rat and he'll drop off. And that's what he did, and the rat fell off. In our lives, there are many, many rats that are eating away at the control ropes. And if we focus on them and we try to get a hold of them, we'll lose even more control. But if we let them go on, we're going to lose control. So the only thing that I can do is gain altitude by moving toward Him. And we believe then that there isn't anything His presence won't cure. As you move toward Him, those rats are going to drop off. Now, this wide path that leads to death and a narrow path that leads to life, God has a funnel that He uses, and the name of that funnel is problems. And problems will drive me to Him. And the beautiful thing is, it doesn't matter where the problem comes from. If it's God's activity, if it's the world and circumstance, if it's the enemy's activity or my own mistakes and my own stupidity, we know that every problem has the same goal, and that's to drive us into His presence. When we're discipling people and we're talking to people and they relate to us a situation in their lives, the first thing that I'm asking myself as I'm listening to them is, how is this going to drive you into the very presence of God? In Him we'll find everything that we desire. I like another thing that Jay gave me here by Madame Guyon that kind of puts together again what we've been emphasizing about coming into His presence and seeing problems come through the hand of God. She says this: if you are to branch out beyond just a time of prayer each day, other parts of your life and even your whole viewpoint of life will have to be altered. This new attitude must come for a very special reason, so that you may go on deeper, still deeper, into another level with your Lord. To do this, you must have a fresh attitude toward yourself as well as toward the Lord. It is an attitude that must go much deeper than any of you have known previously. To do this, I introduce you to a new word. The word is abandonment. To penetrate deeper into the experience of Jesus Christ, it is required that you begin to abandon your whole existence, giving it up to God. Let us take the daily occurrence of life as an illustration. You must utterly believe that the circumstances of your life, that is, every minute of your life, as well as the whole course of your life, anything that happens, have all come to you by His will and His permission. You must utterly believe that everything that has happened to you is from God and is exactly what you need. Such an outlook towards your circumstance and such a look of faith towards your Lord will make you content with everything. Once you believe this, you will then begin to take everything that comes into your life as being from the hand of God and not from the hand of man. We look at every situation and we're not divided because we see God in it, and God is working to press us into the presence of His Son, where we find abundant life. But here's the problem. Why don't we want to go into His presence? Why don't we let circumstance push us to Him? Instead, why do we let it push us to others? Why do we let it push us deeper into ourselves? Why does it push us into our idolatry? What's going on there? You know, one of the things you do with a child, if they have something that you don't want them to have and they're holding it in their hand, and you try to take it out of their hand, they do this to you. They put it behind their back. So you can coax them, and pretty soon they'll hold it out. You try to take it, and they do this. What's the quickest way to get it out of their hand? Well, it's very, very simple. All you got to do is show them something better, and they do this because they want to grab that. And what I want people to see is Jesus Christ, so whatever else they're holding on to, they out of their own choice and their own will throw it away so they can get a hold of Him. But the problem is many, many people are afraid of Jesus. And they treat Him like this. With one hand they would pull Him near, but with the other hand they would push Him away. And the world baffles me the way they're frightened of Christ. I mean, just watch the news. People are scared to death of Jesus. And why is it you can talk about any topic you want to, but when you bring up Jesus, all of a sudden the room will go quiet? People are afraid of Him. And we see that even in the disciples in John 6, and I like the Moffat translation there, where he says that they're toiling away in the dark in a storm. And there they are working and working and working. They've come to the end of their own resources. The storm is overwhelming them. And when Jesus comes, they're frightened. But as soon as He's in the boat, they're at the other side. And how many times in our lives are we toiling away in the dark and Jesus would come, but we don't want Him in the boat? We turn to so many other things other than Him. Herod said that he was troubled in heart at the coming of Christ. How could you be troubled that Jesus is coming? That doesn't make any sense at all. Peter is with Jesus and he says, "Depart from me. I'm a wicked and sinful man." Well, if you're wicked and sinful, wouldn't you want Jesus to come near to you? Why are people afraid of Christ? And this is one of the things that we've found, is that when we minister to people, we're always ministering to their intellect and we don't take time to minister to their emotions. I'm completely convinced that there is no such thing as an intellectual atheist. If there is an intellectual atheist, I'd like to meet them and see them and talk to them, because you'll find that their unbelief isn't rooted in what they know. Their unbelief is rooted in their emotions and what they feel about God, and the questioning is just a symptom of their unbelief. And it doesn't matter how many questions you answer, they are not intending on going to God because of how they feel about Him. One of the fellows who I had an interesting experience with, because his wife had asked to see me, and she wanted to talk about her husband, who was an atheist and an evolutionist, but he shows up at the meeting with her. And so I'm wondering why he's there, and I said, "Why did you come?" And he said, "Well, I was interested in what Christians have to say." But he said, "I'm an intellectual and I'm an atheist and I wouldn't believe any of that." And so I asked him, "Has anyone ever told you why you're an atheist? And why you're an evolutionist?" And he started giving me the facts why. And I said, "No, that's not the facts. What I'd like you to do is just take a little test, because I want to find out how you feel about God." See, we don't take time to find out how people feel. And so what happens is that many people with their minds are running to God and they believe those things and they believe that they're true, but with their emotions they're running away from God. And that causes a divided person, and it's a condition that we call an unbelieving believer. It doesn't mean that you're not going to go to heaven if you're in that state, but it does mean that your life is going to be a daily hell if you're in that state as an unbelieving believer. So with my mind, I run to God, and with my emotions, I run away from God. And that's the unbelieving believer. And what we want to do is pause for a minute and say, why does that exist? And I want to understand how you feel about God, because that's where I need to work. So we have a little test that we give people. Some of you have taken this test. And what I ask them is to answer these questions, how they would feel at their very worst moment. So the whole world's caving in, nothing's working out, things are falling apart, and you're laying in bed depressed, and Mike appears and he wants to ask you these questions. How would you answer these questions? What would you say? And I don't want you to give me the Bible school answer or the Sunday school answer. I asked a pastor this first question: when I think about being with God, I feel, and he said, love. Well, brother, that's beautiful. I learned that in Sunday school myself. But at your very worst moment, how do you feel? And he said, God isn't there for me. There's a difference between what we think and what we feel. So you shift into how you feel, and these are some of the common answers that I get when I ask people these questions. And now I've given this test in nearly 150 countries. And it's amazing that you get similar answers as you go along in these different places. And so when I think about being with God, a lot of people will say, I feel distant. I feel that He's there. When I have to trust God, I feel that He may not come through. He may make me wait. When I think about God, I wish He would talk to me. He's silent. It's like talking to a wall. Sometimes I get angry with God when He doesn't answer me. He doesn't help. It doesn't look like He's going to come through. It frustrates me when God wants me to do something that I can't. I see all the commandments, but I just don't have the power to follow through. I really enjoy God when He's there, and of course this person's depressed and suicidal, so there's not much joy. That tells you that He's probably not there. The one thing I would change about myself to please God is everything. Start at the toenails and work up. I haven't found anything in me I like. When I think about God's commandments, I feel like a failure. I'm waiting for the judgment. The hammer's going to drop. Sometimes I wish God would just take me home. How many times have some of us in the room said that? And I call that state being a suicidal rapturist. I want Jesus to come, but I don't want Him to come because I want to see Him. I want Him to come to get me out of this mess. And isn't it amazing that we go out sharing and witnessing with people, and the whole time we're wishing Jesus would come and get me out of my misery? That I'm that miserable? I can really depend on God if I do everything right because it's performance-based. In my relationship with God, I'm always sure that He'll get me, He'll make me pay. I'm just waiting. The one thing that frightens me about God is His judgment. God surprises me if He helps. And then the one thing I'm afraid God will do is take one of my children to get my attention. Now, as we look at that and we ask people those questions, we begin to see how they're actually feeling about God, not what they're thinking. So we go back then to our list of needs that we talked about, and we've got certain needs that are spiritual needs, and the only one that can meet those needs in my life is Him, and that's the need of security and love, acceptance, assurance, commitment, significance, and you could write out even more of those. But here's this fellow's concept of God. Would you go to a God to have your deepest needs met that you described this way? He's not there, and He doesn't help, and He doesn't listen, and He won't communicate. He'll give you commands you can't keep. You'll be unacceptable. He's going to judge you, make your life miserable. You're not good enough. He's going to get you. If you follow, you'll be unhappy, and He's going to kill one of your children. Would you look to God to get those needs met? Well, I wouldn't. If I told you God was in the room and this is how I described Him, would you want to go spend time with Him? No, you'd be scared to death of Him. And now we begin to understand then why people run away from God and they'll look to their idol because their idol actually looks better than God. I've been discipling people and have them come in with a problem, and I'll look at them and smile and say, I've got good news. There's nothing the nearness of Jesus can't fix. And I've actually had people look at me and say, well, we were hoping you would help. Now, they've got more faith in my ability to help them than they do in His ability to help them. Because of their concept of God, they're afraid of that. And we have to find something that we can trust because we were made for trust and we were made for faith. So if I put all of you on an airplane and said, I want you to go to Fiji, take 2 weeks off and relax, and I'll take care of your finances and I'll take care of all the problems, I'll do all of that for you. I just want you to go and relax. And you're halfway to Fiji and the pilot comes back with a fax and it says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to take care of your family for you, but here's a resume of a couple of people you can choose. Tell me who you want me to put in charge. And the first one you read off is like this. Would you put them in charge of your family? And the second one I read off is just a description of your self-life that we talked about in your self-centeredness and your insanity and your controlling identity. Those are the only two options you have of putting people in charge of your life. Who would you pick? Would you have a panic attack? And you can't go back. So you can see the stress that people are under. There's three types of people. There are people who are just rowboat Christians, and they've got to go in their own strength and their own power because they don't have a God. And then you got people that are sailboat Christians, and they got to go on the power and the wind of somebody else, and they're counting on someone else to blow them along the way. But a powerboat Christian has got Christ in them, living through them as though it's them. But we're afraid of Him because of these different concepts that we have of God. Now, we know that that doesn't describe God, so who does it describe? Yeah, it's interesting. I used to think it was only about 92 to 93% of the time. Now I'm pushing it and saying I just think it's nearly 100% of the time that what this person is describing is their earthly father, their dad. Because by age 7, you have a fixed concept of authority, and you get your concept of authority by the only authority that you've known. I can almost promise you that if you had a passive father, that when the pressure's on, you feel that God's not going to act, He's not going to be there. If you had a father that was angry and explosive, you're always waiting for God to be angry and explosive. If you had a father who criticized all the time, when you open up the Bible, all you're going to read in there are the things that you did wrong. And so we look at these different concepts of God that people get from their earthly father. And these are some of the thoughts that you'll see these people having about God because of the relationship that they had with their dad. There's the dead God, and when the pressure's on, He's not there. When I pray, it's like praying to a brick wall. He never helps me. There's the distant God. I can't reach Him. I know that He's there. I call to Him, but He doesn't respond. Then you have the overpowering God that just imposes Himself on you. The explosive God. You have the God that you're afraid of. Then there's the God who just confuses you. What does He want? If you're a thinker kid growing up in a family where dad's always shifting the rules, you don't know exactly what He does want. Then you have the lying God. You know, one of the fellows who I just teared up when he was telling me because he was so soft and he was a drug addict and he'd really been beat up in life. But he told me that growing up abandoned by his father with his mother, that Dad would show up sometime after Thanksgiving every year, and Dad was an alcoholic. And Dad would take him down to Toys R Us or one of those big shops, Sears or wherever it was, and have him pick out everything that he wanted for Christmas. And he'd pick it all out, and they'd push it there in a big cart, and Dad would put it in layaway for him. And every Christmas, he wouldn't find a single thing under the tree or anything from his dad, but sometime in January, his dad would leave him a York peppermint patty with a quarter stuck in the side of it. That was his Christmas gift. The lying God. I can't trust anything that God tells me. You know, I had another fellow in who really needed Christ and just wouldn't receive Him. And he'd grown up with a psychotic mother. And when he was about 12 years old, his mother came in while he was watching television, and she says, if your tongue offends you, cut it off. And she stuck out her tongue and cut it off with the shears. That's what God tells you to do. And here was a fellow who was scared to death of God because of what he'd been told by her just before she did that. And you know, the interesting thing is, now that'd be very obvious for me to tell you that if someone gave you that kind of a concept of God, you'd be afraid, wouldn't you? And yet He never put that together until we put it together in this little test. You have the materialistic God, that things are more important than you. And you've got the dad that absolutely explodes when anything of his goes missing or anything of his is broken or you put a little dent in the car, those kind of things. You have the preoccupied God. He's just too busy for you. The one that shows partiality. The passive God, the performance God, the physically abusive one. The lying, the God of judgments, the one that will verbally abuse you. And then finally you have the emotionally absent God. Now, what do we do with those concepts that we have about God? Is that really who God is? Well, it's not. Well, who is He? Well, 1 John 4:8 says that God is love. And so if I want to know who God is, all I have to do is turn to my Bible to 1 Corinthians 13, and there I'll discover who He is. In fact, that's a beautiful model if you want to be a father. Because God is this, and all you have to do, and I have people open their Bibles to 1 Corinthians 13, as it describes love, I have them read it, and instead of using the word love everywhere it appears, you have to use the word God. And then we go down, and I'll have a little dictionary there, And God is patient, and I'll have the person look up what patient is. And God is kind, and He's not jealous, and He doesn't brag, and He's not arrogant. He'll never act unbecoming. He won't seek His own. He isn't provoked. There's no account of wrongs. He hates unrighteousness. He loves the truth. He bears with you. He believes in you. He hopes in you. He endures with you, and He never fails. And I'd ask you tonight, do you really believe all this about Him? Because if you do, you're going to sleep very, very well. Do you really believe that about Him? That He's got no list on you tonight? That you haven't upset Him? That there's not any judgment coming? That He's bearing with you? That He's been enduring with you? That He's been do you really believe that tonight? One fella came to my office, and of course, as you minister, you're ministered too. And he told me that he'd done something, and I'd tried to talk to him for years about some of his behavior, and really degenerate behavior. And he wouldn't listen to it, he would only justify it. And he came to the office, and he was shaking, he was in tears, and he said, I've got to tell you what I did. He said, I just got alone with God and said, let me see myself the way you see me. And he said, I saw everything that you were talking about, and I came apart. What I'm doing is wicked. It is degenerate. It is wrong. I'm repenting. I've got to change course. I've got to change course. I've seen how God sees me. And that impressed me that he would do that. And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, one day I'm going to do that. But I don't know if I could handle what he would see. I don't know if I could handle what he would say to me. And so last summer, I was up at the cabin, and I was alone, and I was having my time with him. And I was meditating, and I just said, okay, Lord, I wanted to ask this. What's my problem? And I sat there waiting, and I knew I'd be undone. And he whispered to me and said, you don't really know that I'm love. You don't know how much I love you. You don't know that I'm mad about you. You teach these things, but you don't know it. You cannot change me. Just as a rock is a rock and the sun is the sun, and you can curse it, you can kick it, you can do what it wants to. I am love, and I am love totally independent of you. And Mike, it has nothing to do with you. This is what I am. I am all of these things to you. And I had the illumination or the revelation that God was actually pure love, and that changed everything for me. I laid all the past aside and was ready to press on into the love of God. Do you know how well you sleep when you know that this is really who God is? Now, there's a problem. Even though I know that, and this is the fact, all of my feelings are telling me that He's this, because I've lived under that concept for so long. So how do I turn my lying emotions into fact? Well, if you wait for lying emotions to agree with the fact, how long will you wait? Now, here's a problem that we want to do, and it excludes faith. I want to snap my fingers and have my feelings change to the fact, but they won't. Now, why does God take time changing my feelings? Do you know that a lot of people are actually praying to be bipolar? They want to be bipolar. And by that, they want to take a big swing. That's what a bipolar person does. They swing from depression to being giddy in an instant and then back again. And what we're doing is we're praying, would you please make me bipolar and just swing all my feelings over here from the lies instantly over to the facts like that. But if you do things quickly, they'll be undone quickly. But if you do things slowly, they have to be undone slowly. And if you do things slowly, it's an act of faith. And if you do things quickly, there is no faith in it. And so God wants to move my lying emotions into fact in a slow way. So we give the example, you're in the mountains and the bear's chasing you. You fall down, he swipes at you. You go a little bit farther. You fall again, he swipes. You're barely going to make it. You see a cabin. You go running up to it. You get in there. You close the door. You put down the bar, and the bear hits the cabin and falls back. And you look out the window and you see the bear can't get in. So what do you do next? Just giggle? What a friend we have in Jesus. That was weird. No, you don't. Even though your eyes are telling you that you're safe and that's the fact, the feelings are telling you you're still going to die. And you have to sit there until you calm down and then make a choice. Am I going to stay there and never leave this cabin again, or am I going to go? Now, all of that is a process that takes some time, and I found that it takes 3 to 5 years to change lying emotions into the fact. But I'll tell you what, if you'll take that process and you won't be praying that God would instantly just change this and you'll be bipolar, no one can undo that again once it's done. I see that God is this. It's a fact, and I had to walk in it. And when I first began to see that years ago, in the middle of my depression, I just stood up and said, God, I feel all of this about you, but the fact is you're this, and if you're not this, you kill me by noon. Well, He didn't kill me by noon. And I said, if you don't kill me by noon, I'm going to move forward in the love of God. And that's been a continued revelation as I'm able to move forward in that love. But it takes that time of denying those kind of emotions. You know, it's a wonderful thing when you really see who God is. And in the flesh and in the human nature, we actually take this old concept of God and we use it with people to beat them up. Because we know that they feel that about that, or feel this about God. And so when we look at motivation, there's 2 ways that you can motivate a Christian to act. And one of the ways you can motivate them to act, which is really the world's method and the carnal Christian's method of motivation, is that I'm going to motivate you to act through fear. And why am I buying into that? If I believe in a 1 Corinthians 13 God, how in the world can I be motivated by fear? Or I'm going to motivate you through guilt. Where does that fit? I'm going to motivate you through punishment, through judgment, through comparisons, through condemnation. How many of you have gone to a conference and that was really the root of the motivation for you to get going? How many have heard a sermon and that's really the root of the motivation is this kind of thing, which is judgment, comparison, condemnation? I'll tell you this, a preacher's preaching reveals him. You want to know all about him, you just listen to him. And when he's using these things to motivate you, you know that he's operating out of a lying concept of God and a false concept of God. Because here's how God motivates me to act, and He breaks me. I love Him because what? He first loved me. And He has motivated me to act in my life through His forgiveness, through His life, through His love, through His grace, through His compassion, and through His mercy. Now, if I can preach with conviction on these topics of grace, compassion, mercy, and forgiveness and love, you will have a revelation of Mike. And what is the thing that you're going to know about Mike? How did I come to this level of understanding about forgiveness? How did I? It's a revelation. Because I failed. That's the only way I could have done it, is I failed. How do I know so much about mercy? Because I failed. How do I know so much about compassion? Because I failed. How do I know so much about grace? Because I failed. Because of love. Because of life. It's all because I failed. And God has used those failures to teach me something. If you stand in the right system, this world is perfect to produce what God wants to produce. Now here's the amazing thing, that God created the world, and then 5 days later He created man. So what came first? The world or man? The world came first. But it says that He created the slain lamb from the foundations of the world. So what came before the world and man? The slain lamb. Now what that tells me then is that God's plan was always to use a fallen world, to use a fallen man, to use what has taken place around us, to use every bit of this misery that we have to produce something in us. He does not have a plan B. Adam's failure, though God didn't create it and God didn't cause it, God knew that it was coming, and He wanted to use that for the perfection of not making a perfect Adam, but a man who becomes the child of God. And it all takes place in the love of God. The slain lamb before the foundation of the world. He's been using all of the things and the problems that we've created to perfect us and to make what He wants to make. He's in charge of the whole thing.